Welcome to the Fleet Success Show. We are a podcast dedicated to talking about the fundamentals, standards, and best practices that empower today's fleets to achieve fleet success. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Fleet Success Show. I'm your host, Jeff Jenkins. I know that's odd to hear, right? Because usually this is Josh introducing the podcast, but he's actually tending to some other business right now, much more important than being here on the podcast. He's got some family things he's doing, but I have a special guest for us today. I'm really excited to bring on the podcast Jan Smith.
Hey, everybody.
Perfect. So, Jan, you've been dealing with fleets for a long time, over 30 years.
Yes.
So what I'm hearing is you've forgotten more than most people are ever going to learn.
That's probably true. With age, I guess that counts. But yeah, with the change in the industry and everything going on, you kind of think back about where you were and think where you are now. And things have changed so much that you kind of forget about those things that were in place 30 years ago.
Yeah, and I want to talk about a little bit about what's changed, right, in the last 30 years, some of those things. So if we start just at the high level, we can talk about vehicles first, right? So vehicles have changed dramatically, mostly a lot of the electronics that are in the vehicles now, right? So kind of just like give us your viewpoint of the big changes just in regards to vehicles.
Well, I think that, back 30 years ago, when you had a vehicle, it was set for a specific purpose. And that purpose was for it to either haul or to drive or to carry, whatever you're doing with that. And the vehicles today, they serve so many different purposes and they have so many different options to them. Back then, you see the electronics in them compared to what they were today. It's scary to think that you had those, you drove and you had to be aware of what's in your mirrors and what's going on around you.
Yeah.
Now it makes it so easy. They have a camera that pops up on the right-hand side when you want to change lanes or when you back up. And even in my truck, I've had a hard time getting used to that backup camera because back then, that was what you did. Everything was pretty much manual from that standpoint. For a vehicle to have an electric start on it, was just crazy, and when you wanted air conditioning, you had to order that special in a vehicle.
Yeah.
Nowadays, especially here in Arizona, you don't get a vehicle here without air conditioning or some of those other amenities in the vehicle. Seating. I remember getting in my first truck, and to have a solid seat that just didn't move at all. And nowadays, they're so comfortable, they're air ride, they're cushioned, they're air conditioned,
massagers in the chairs,
everything, it's just crazy what you can do with them. So again, back then vehicles served a purpose. Now they are built more for our comfort.
Yeah, they're an extension, right? Kind of an extension of your home.
They really are.
So do you trust your backup camera now?
I still look at my mirrors first.
Okay.
It's just a common habit for me. But, the first time I drove with my wife, she said, well, it has a backup camera. I said, yeah, but I don't trust that.
I mean, it's real time what's behind me, but I don't trust it.
Yeah.
It's funny because every time I see someone with a backup camera, they'll do like the turnaround, right? I'm like, that camera works just fine. It's right there. Oh, I don't trust that thing. It's like it's a false image, right? That they just put inside the truck.
When I ride with my daughter and that camera comes on when she changes lanes, it startles me because I'm like, what, wait a minute. So vehicles have changed not only internally in the cab and everything else, but also externally.
Yeah. The parts
have changed, the way they function, the way that they're built, and they're built more as a solid unit or a one unit. Used to be you had a part for this, a bumper, you had a part for that, and everything that went on. Nowadays, it's all built in one. So
and it was more simplistic back then. You remember back, like if you grab an old vehicle made in the 60s to 70s and you pop the hood, there's so much room and space inside that engine block. Right. Whereas now everything's so tight, compacted, compressed that back then you could go and work on your vehicles and it was much easier.
I remember being told that they say the mechanics of tomorrow won't know what an aspirated engine is. or a carbureted engine. It just was not the thing. And you kind of like, wait a minute, everybody has these, but even people's cars, unless you get to some of those people who have some old cars, their hobby cars in the back, even those, they're no longer carburation on them. It's all fuel injected. It's more efficient. Vehicles are more efficient today. They have to be.
Yeah.
And thank heavens with the price of fuel. Back then, it was not that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about like how there's less room, right? So mechanics, they've had to change over the last 30 years as well, right? The knowledge that they know. It used to be where, if someone wanted to learn how to fix an engine, you could self-teach yourself. I guess you could be self-taught a lot easier than you can now because you have all the electronics and the diagnostics.
Yeah, so many shade tree mechanics. That's what we were called back then, shade tree mechanics, where, you could fix the vehicle if it had a problem, you pulled over. Nowadays, with all electronics, if you don't have some type of a gadget that reads and the ECM and everything else that goes on it, it's pretty difficult to tell what's going on with that engine and what type of bells and whistles and buzzers are going off to tell you what's going on inside under the hood.
Yeah. Do you think because of all that advancement and how many more parts and everything that vehicles take longer to fix or less time to fix?
I think with the tools that we have now, it's easier for the vehicle to tell you, if I can say that.
Right. You don't have to diagnose it.
You don't have to diagnose it. It used to be, if you had a mechanic who could do electric, he was worth his weight in gold because he could diagnose things. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, all that's being told you, the engine, the car vehicle tells you what's going on with it. So I think it takes less to diagnose, but the labor to repair things, I go in and what was it I had the other day? And they said the labor to do this is like 24 hours. The parts like $30, So it's to get to it. I had on my car, I have a Hyundai, really nice car, but it has a problem. The check engine light comes on. And when they diagnosed it, they said it's a sensor on top of the fuel tank. And they say it's not leaking fuel, it's not dangerous, but to repair that, they have to drop the whole fuel tank out. And so it takes X number of hours, and it's like a $700 job to change that, $15 sensor.
Yeah, and all because they've tried to compartmentalize everything, get it all compacted. It definitely drives up those labor costs. It's funny, I had a Yukon, not a Yukon, what was it? GMC Sierra, right? And it was 2015, so it wasn't too old. The battery died, so I had to go change the battery. So what do? I go and I pop the hood, and where the hell's the battery? Like, I'm looking all over for it, and I'm like, okay, I guess I feel like an idiot, first of all. So I get the owner's manual, and I'm like, okay, where the heck is the battery at? It's under the middle seat behind the passenger side. So I had to take that out, lift it up just to change the battery, and the space, it was just like I had to grease the sides of the battery just to get it in and out.
Well, my Hyundai, if you want to jump something on it, you pull off these caps and you have just two spades sticking up, and that's what you use. The battery's somewhere underneath that. But if you want to feel silly, I have a 2019 GMC Denali.
Okay.
And I took it in to have it checked. They said, hey, your battery's cracked, and but it's under warranty, we'll replace it. And I said, well, if you replace it and you'll make sure it's all wiped down, because I don't want that acid all over everything. So it comes back, and I start having a problem not too long ago. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I take it back in, and they said, yep, the battery's bad. And I said, well, we just replaced that one. They said, no, that's the other one we replaced. It has two batteries on it, and one of them you can't even see. It's down underneath the side, and it's buried down in there. And so they said, what happens is we have to replace them both, because if we don't replace them both, one will wear out faster.
It'll draw more power.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm used to when you open a hood, if you had dual batteries, you saw them both right up there on the top, right on the front. Now, that second battery is somewhere buried down underneath there, and only they know it's there. I still couldn't tell you where it's at.
Yeah, it's almost not worth the hassle if you're just a common person to work on your car.
It's gotten to be that point where, and you see a lot of people, most people these days, you go to any dealership, and you see them lined up to go in there, and that's just the dealerships, and you know what they charge. So other repair shops. So it's, if you have people who know how to repair cars today and can use the proper tools and diagnose it properly, I'll tell you, most people would rather have that than and then try to do it themselves. You can't.
No, you absolutely can't. And we talk about now, like one of the big struggles a lot of fleet managers go through is retaining technicians or just retaining staff in general, right? And I think a lot of that is kind of, how things are managed in just the society we live in. Like, what do you recall from back in the day as far as management styles or how people were managed versus how it's done today?
Oh, it's a lot different today, and technicians are different. And nothing against technicians, but I think the technicians today are more, they're more educated. They have to be. Back then, you could bring someone into your shop who knew how to turn wrenches, and as long as you kept him happy and gave him a lunch break and he had what he needed, or she, they would be fine, and they could manage, and they got paid. Nowadays, there's so much to it. A lot of shops will provide certain tools. I remember back with us, the only tools you had to get were the large tools. If you're working on something large and you had to have the large spanner wrenches or large sockets, things like that. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, there's so much you need to work on a car, and you walk into any shop and you see those toolboxes, and technicians are and they know they can work anywhere. Mm-hmm. It used to be in the day you kept people because they stayed with you. Nowadays,
you're jumping.
They're jumping.
Yeah. A lot of that, I think, is just that's time and age that we live in, right? People job hop. The average person stays at a job for like 3 years, I think is what it is. It's not very long, and that can cross just different professions. But people, they always think the grass is greener, and so they're always jumping, right? We've talked many times on the podcast about, retention and how to treat employees, and, making sure that, if you are a technician and someone's offering you another 50 cents or $1, you're really looking at what type of culture you're going into, right? And it'll be a problem. It'll continue to be a problem because we're very impatient as a society in general, right? And I think that's, a lot to do with, fast food, right? You have your instant TV coming to you, whether it's movies or your streaming sports. Like we don't have patience anymore for anything. And so that translates very much into employment as well.
Satisfaction, that self-gratification, that self-satisfaction. I was just talking the other day with my son-in-law about Amazon. Here in Arizona, you get Amazon the same day.
Yeah, like 3 hours later.
Yeah, and his brother lives back east in Iowa, and he lives out in the sticks a little bit, and he says Prime for them is 4 to 5 days.
Yeah.
So we are used to having that quickly, having it now, everything. In fact, you talk about sports, boxing matches, you pay and you can watch boxing match no matter where it's at in the world, mm-hmm. So you have all that, and you didn't have those kind of things back then, cell phones and everything else that's going on. The big costs were, as if you're managing a fleet, were fuel and tires and parts,
Right.
Those were the big three. And even now when I talk to people and talk about software, I see, they say, well, we're not tracking parts, we're not tracking labor. And I'm like,
what?
How can you do that? How can you do that? Because those are such major costs. But, now we know that, because of the epidemic or whatever it is, parts are difficult to get a hold of. I think you have said, Jeff, about people, buying extra new vehicles. They can't get the chips for them, so you can buy them for extra parts,
Yeah.
And it's an easy way to get parts.
It's an expensive way to get parts too. And that's like the unfortunate part, right? Is it's very expensive. So before we started this, we were talking about kind of some of the things we wanted to address. And you had mentioned, relationships, like the buying cycle and what was important for, fleet managers or procurement people on purchasing. And you had kind of talked about, how there's been a little bit of a shift. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I remember my father, way back when, he had a 72 Chev pickup, and all of his trucks, he went to one dealership and he talked to Curly. Curly was that person. He had that relationship with them, and he just bought his vehicles from them. There was never any question.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it's a little different. You're shopping. We shop prices because it's so easy.
It's convenient
to shop prices. But to have relationships, with people, it's still important. We're not so much about price anymore as we are about that relationship, who we trust, who we feel good with. And even to the point of employees, you build relationships. We're always looking at how people's lives are and how they're living and how they feel. We're a feel good civilization now, so the relationship is important.
It's funny. Our decisions are based on feelings, right? Our reactions to what people say or what they do. It's totally feeling based. We've given so much credit to that and less credit to data and facts that is true. It drives what we do and how we react. When I took over at Fleetwood, one of the things that I did when I first got there was I started looking at what we were spending with all of our different vendors to see where I could cut costs. We were losing millions of dollars a year. So one of the things that I did is I looked at our tire costs, and we had this vendor that we've been using for over 20 years, right down the road from where we are. But the shop manager, he'd always bought these tires from this guy. He had this great relationship with them. They would come by every week, right, just to stop by and visit and say hi. Buy lunch for the mechanics and everything once a month, right? They were very good at relationship building. However, when I started digging into it, their tires were almost 50% higher than everybody else because this guy knew that the relationship with our shop manager was all he needed. So they would raise the price. We wouldn't even sneeze at it and just say, okay.
No question.
No question at all. So like a steer tire, almost $1,000 for a steer tire. And I'm like, what in the hell are we doing? Right? So I call the guy in and I say, hey, just so you know, I'm going out and looking for other vendors for tires if you want to look at your pricing. Well, we have this relationship. We've been doing this together for so many years. He's like, are you sure you want to go out? And I said, well, can you give me a price cut on the tire? Well, I can probably give you like a 5% price cut on the tires. I went out and found that same steer tire for $400.
And it's interesting because where I was at the college in Salt Lake City, we were on state contract. And so state contract, you bought tires on state contract, talking about tires.
Yep.
And I said I could go anywhere and I could beat that state contract any day of the week. Now, granted, I was small peanuts,
Yeah.
So I wasn't looking for thousands of tires. But I'm telling you, the pricing, nowadays, but the thing of it is, and you've heard me say this before, people buy an emotion. Mm-hmm. That's why we have red sports cars. White sports cars go just as fast as red sports cars, but we buy an emotion and we justify on fact. And so once you start looking at the facts, just like your tire story, you say, whoa, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And that's one of the things we have today that we didn't necessarily have before is we have the facts are at our fingertips, even with our software. You can look at it and you can see it at a moment, so you have those facts. And so we're more likely today to look at those facts rather than the relationships we had before.
Yeah, you're absolutely true. It's funny, you mentioned the red sports cars. Like when I was buying my first car by myself, my mom's only advice to me was, do not buy a red car because it stands out to cops, and the way you drive, you're going to get a ticket every time you get on the road.
Did you?
Not every time.
You still bought the red sports car, the red car though.
No, actually, I bought a silver one.
Oh.
It was a silver Mustang.
Gotcha.
And I got plenty of tickets. I haven't changed my driving habits, so it is what it is.
Yeah, just be careful. I saw today all the motor cops are out now. The weather's changed and the motor cops are out now, so
yeah,
just watch it out there.
They're a little more concealed.
A little bit more concealed, yep. Yeah. So, but I think today another thing too is that we look at is reliability in our vehicles. Mm-hmm. Before we bought vehicles because they were the vehicles. You bought a 10-wheel dump truck. You bought a flatbed. You bought this because that's what it was.
Right.
Nowadays, we do more comparisons between manufacturers, comparisons between what we're getting. And, of course, then you throw in there all the EV and everything else that goes along with that. And you have so much more to go off. But I think vehicles, they may take a little longer, a little bit different to diagnose, but at the same time, I think they are a little bit more reliable.
They are a little more reliable. I would agree with that statement. But we also have so much, there is a lot of data, right? Especially with the internet and all that. But, you have all these consumer groups that come out too, and they take surveys and they give awards based on it. So, you got the J.D. Power guys out there giving all these, there's 100 different awards for different cars, mini, compact, full-size, truck, full-size. There's so many of them out there. And sometimes you're just like, dude, I just want a car.
Well, I was just talking with someone the other day about this. We are not so locked into price, what we talked about, as we are, take Amazon. How many times do you go to Amazon, do you look at what the people are saying about it, Let's see what the reports are, what people are saying, how is this product,
All
and
the
you
time.
compare products.
Yep.
We compare products because we want that reliability. We demand that reliability out there. So rather than just, hey, we need this, we'll buy this, we're more looking at, well, which is the best one? What does this group say is the best one? Right. What are the top 10 for 2022? So we compare those things. So we're more looking into that reliability in everything we buy.
I agree, 100%. So you've got a lot of experience. Kind of walk me through the 3 most important things that a fleet manager should know. And let's start with like the before, right? So when you first started, and then as it is now.
Yeah, when you first started, I think people didn't look at you as hard. You kind of had your own little kingdom. You had your own way of doing things, and as long as the police cars ran, as long as the mayor had his purple car. I had a guy, my vice president. Whenever he went on tours, he always wanted a car that had no labels. There's no insignia from the college on that car. Now, I don't know where he went, but that was one of the things he required. So I think you were less likely to be under the spotlight back then. As long as you ran and things ran well, that was the way it is. Today, I think it's a lot different. I think you have to deal with, right now, costs are up, percentage, 10%. If you look at cost 10%.
In like last year.
8.7, just in the last year. Yep. And I think, you're held accountable for more of that. So before you were held accountable for having the vehicles running, and that's what you did. You focused on that. You weren't worried about your technicians. All that was taken care of, handled. The budget was pretty much easy. Nowadays, it's a lot different. You're held up to a record, that you have to keep going along. You're under the spotlight. And those questions come up not only by your boss, but also by outside groups, especially when you get into cities or other organizations, stockholders. You guys have talked about it. We've got these stockholders out there, people who have interest in what we're doing, and we have to make them happy. And they're allowed to ask questions. Before, they never really cared about asking questions. So I think it's changed a lot from that standpoint. If I had to do it now versus today, I would try to be on top of the what's going on with my money and inside the shop, as opposed to what's going on outside. The vehicles are reliable. If I've got them up and running, if there's not a problem, they're out there, they're doing their thing. But really, it's what's going on, and am I able to afford this? I talk to people that say, well, our budget is only allowing us to buy the parts we need, as opposed to other things. So I think it's changed a lot over the years. Yeah,
and when we were talking before we started recording, one of the things that we talked about is you had said, back when I first started, your 3 major costs: fuel, tires, parts, right? And there's kind of been a shift in what those major costs are.
Oh, totally.
Because, right now you look at it and it's like, okay, well, my workforce, right? Your labor force is a very, very big part of that cost as well. You need more people.
You have to have more people.
And that adds to it quite exponentially. But on top of that, you add more people, but vehicles are also more reliable, but they can take longer to fix, just based on how compacted it is under the engine and just all the different parts and the different things that are in there, and even, getting those parts to you. So it takes longer. But the overall costs of what it takes not only to buy a vehicle, but also to maintain a vehicle, right, have gone up just incredibly.
And you talk about tires. Tires is one of those areas. You think about it. I remember when they talked about, we're going to put chips in tires. We're going to put barcodes built in. We're going to do all this. None of that's really come to fruition. But it's interesting about tires, and I'll tell a personal story. With my 2019 GMC I bought, and I've got 20,000, just over 20,000 miles on it. I've had 2 of my tires they basically have just separated.
Okay.
And I've got another one in the back now that so can I rely on those other two? And so I was looking around. I finally went to one of their dealers, and they told me, they said, oh yeah, the dealerships put those tires on. The manufacturers put those tires on because they're soft and they're quiet.
Yeah.
He says, I would not run those vehicles on my tires, on my vehicle, tires on my vehicle. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I just paid, $80,000 for this vehicle. I expect these tires will last at least 40,000 miles, not 20,000 miles. And so, it's even in the technology of tires and what we want, they do that because we want them soft and we want them quiet.
Right.
But they don't last. So, you're out and you look at a set of tires nowadays, you're talking $1,000, $1,200, $1,500. So it's interesting how much the cost on tires back then versus the cost on tires now. And I think we're more, I don't know if we're more accepting of just what's out there. We take what's out there. We have so many different options. But back then, tires was a big cost. And it still is, especially if you're running a transit fleet or something like that. Mm-hmm. So fuel, tires, and then obviously parts back then to keep them in stock.
Right.
And then, a lot of times you see, and I talk to people where they have parts that are sitting on the shelf, have been there for years because they've sold off those buses. They've sold off those vehicles. And what do they do with the parts, And so they're there. But nowadays, you don't keep those kind of things around. Your parts is you keep a thin part system, because that the most expensive part of your shop is your parts room because things just sit. So the biggest real estate you have in your shop is in your parts room.
I agree. So when I did my first full parts inventory at the end of the first year, over a fleet, we have $1 million in parts that we were never going to use because they were all outdated and expired. It was a ridiculous amount of money that was just left there because there wasn't a proper accounting of parts, right? It was just, I need something, I go in and grab it. I mean, it was terrible, unbelievable about how much waste there was. So any last parting words of advice that you want to give to our listeners?
Yeah, I think, maybe I'll be a little selfish here. I think having some type of an FMIS system that helps you. There are so many fingers out there, and it's hard for one person to keep track on that. I go into fleets where you have a whiteboard and you have all the PMs on it, and I'm like, how do you track, how does that happen? Parts, and you just talked about the parts going in, the parts going out. So I think for me, if I were back running a shop, I would definitely shop vehicles. I would definitely shop a tire vendor. I may not keep tires in stock, but I would have a tire vendor that I could rely on that would do that. Someone who might even come out and do a tread wear evaluation, see if I'm using the best tires. And I think from that standpoint, if I had those things in place, fuel, it doesn't matter. It seems like what fueling vendor you have, you're still going to pay for fuel, and you're going to pay the cost of whatever the market is out there. Mm-hmm. So fuel is one of those things. So I think having a system that would help me where I could see where I'm at, where I had that capability, I would know. I know in our system, we have a report that I can go out there and I can look and I can see every job that I've done, the number of times I've done it in a time frame. And then I can go across there. It breaks it out by labor and parts and things like that. But over on the far side, there's two columns. One is percentage and one is cost. And I can look at that percentage. And so we always used to hear the term management by walking around. Well, I like to look at that and say, this is management by reporting, because I could look at that report monthly, quarterly, whatever I want, and I could see where I'm spending my time in my shop. I could see what percentage of PMs, what percentage of exhaust, what percentage of tires, what percentage of the dents, bumps, and dings that the drivers put in there. So I can see what's going on in my fleet, things that would keep me awake at night, or in your case, lose my hair. But so having something like that allows me to have something, so I don't have to keep all that, on spreadsheets or whatever. I think that's key for nowadays. And then I think from that standpoint, if I had that set up, had the fueling, had the parts inventory where I could manage it, where it's not overstocked like what you were talking about, I think you'd be much better off, a much better supervisor, because then you could focus on the things you need to focus on, and those are your technicians.
Yep.
Keeping people, making them happy. What do I need to do to have in place to keep knowledgeable technicians, so that the jobs, I've got parts or vehicles in the shop that aren't sitting there for 10 and 15 and 20 and 30 days. I think that would if it were me, if I were out there doing it again, that's where I would look.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, technology is obviously a very important part. So, well, Jan, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. Dropped a lot of good knowledge on us.
I hope so.
Thank you, everyone, for listening again. Don't forget that we have the Fleet Success Playbook. Email us if you would like a copy. Podcast@rtafleet.com. Include your name, address, where you want to send it. We'd be more than happy to send you a free copy. Additionally, we've announced it. We're going to keep announcing it. The Fleet Success Summit coming up March 21st through 22nd in Las Vegas. We got great speakers. We keep announcing more and more. Go to fleetsuccesssummit.com if you'd like to see who the lineup is. We're also going to have some of those speakers that are going to be guests on our podcast here, so that you guys can get a little preview of some of the things that they'll be able to enlighten us with in March in Las Vegas. Well, that's all we've got for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Fleet Success Show. If you like the show, we'd appreciate your 5-star review. Be sure to subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts and come hang out with us on social media at Fleet Success. See you next time.